My name is Nora. I'm 33 years old. My birthday should have been a moment of joy, but right there at the party, in front of relatives and friends, my parents coldly placed a suitcase in front of me and declared, "You're not staying here anymore. This family doesn't support freeloaders." I stood frozen, hearing the whispers behind me, seeing my brother smirk and my mother lowering her head, pretending to stay silent. No one knew that for years I was the one quietly paying off debts, covering bills, keeping the lights on in that house, and yet, in their eyes, I was just a burden to discard. That moment felt like the entire world collapsed beneath my feet. But instead of crying or begging, I simply gave a cold smile and silently made a promise to myself. If they wanted me out of their lives, then I'd let them feel what it's like to lose the one person who'd been holding the family together all these years. Have you ever been betrayed by your own flesh and blood, on the day you needed them most? If you've felt that kind of pain, share your story in the comments. Hit like so more people can see it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the next chapters of my journey. Because that very night, I started a plan that would turn their lives upside down. I was born and raised in a small town on the outskirts of Chicago, where people like to believe that every family was close-knit, loving, and full of sacrifice. I once believed mine was no different. To the neighbors, Richard, my father, was a responsible man, a hardworking dad who provided for his family. Martha, my mother, loved to tell everyone she had given up her youth to raise her children. And Kevin, my younger brother, was always introduced as the golden boy, the one everyone believed would follow in our father's footsteps and succeed. But behind closed doors, the truth was completely different. My father had been unemployed for years, spending his days slouched in an old recliner, drinking beer and complaining that the world had wronged him, that his youth had been stolen. He'd say to me over and over, "If it weren't for you, I could have lived a different life." Every time I heard those words, it felt like a knife to my chest. What had I done wrong besides trying to carry what he refused to? My mother was another story. She often told others that her health was poor, that she'd suffered years of illness. In reality, she spent hours chatting on the phone or shopping for things she didn't need. Whenever I came home, she'd sigh, hold out her medical bills, and say, "If it weren't for you, I don't know how I'd survive." It sounded like gratitude, but to me, it felt like a noose tightening around my neck, tying me to responsibilities that should never have been mine. Kevin, my brother, was sent to an expensive private university. I remember the day my parents sat me down and persuaded me to take out another loan to cover his tuition. "Kevin is our only hope," my mother said, her eyes brimming with tears. "You're smart. You've got a good job now. Let Kevin have his chance." I agreed. I even cut back on my own expenses just to support him. But within a year, Kevin was expelled for skipping class and racking up gambling debts. And yet, in my parents' eyes, he wasn't at fault. They always had an excuse. "He's young, he needs time," my father said. "You have to understand your brother." Day by day, I saw the truth more clearly. My family was like a house that looked fine on the outside, but was rotting inside. I was the only support beam keeping it from falling. If I broke, everything would collapse. I worked as a financial manager in Chicago. The job was stressful but steady. Each month, most of my paycheck didn't go to me. It went to cover credit card debt my parents had racked up. I still remember one time checking my account and finding the balance nearly wiped out from unexpected transactions. Turned out, Kevin had maxed out the secondary credit card my parents had secretly given him to gamble with. I was shaking with anger and called my mother. She gently replied, "Kevin promised he'd change. You love your brother, don't you? Just give him one more chance." Those words were a trap. If I refused, I'd be labeled selfish, ungrateful. If I agreed, I'd be drained even further. And for most of those years, I chose silence and compliance. One winter evening, just after work, I got a frantic call from my father. He said the roof was leaking badly, and if we didn't fix it right away, it could collapse. I rushed home, bought materials, and climbed onto the roof myself in heavy snowfall. As I shivered, trying to secure each sheet of tin, my father sat inside, drinking beer and watching TV. Through the window, I heard him grumble, She's grown but still doesn't know how to take care of a house. Just a worker bee. I wanted to scream, but I bit my lip and kept working, afraid that if I stopped, the roof would fall and my mother would have nowhere to stay. For years, I became a shadow in my own family. I worked nonstop, cut out every joy, didn't dare travel, didn't buy myself new shoes. Every time my coworkers invited me out, I made excuses when in reality, I was wiring money to my parents. I once believed that if I sacrificed enough, one day they'd truly see me. But all I got in return was their contempt. Another memory I can never forget was when my mother had to be hospitalized. I paid for everything, every pill, every test, and even took time off work to care for her. I spent sleepless nights holding her hand by the hospital bed. But when she recovered, instead of thanking me, she told relatives that Kevin had cared for her while I did nothing but focus on my job. Hearing that, my heart froze. I couldn't understand how she could twist the truth just to paint a heroic image of her son. Still, I kept spinning in that cycle. I think it's because I feared losing what little I had left to call family. I was afraid that if I stopped, I'd be truly alone. And I think they knew that used it against me. Each month, after covering utilities, my mother's medical insurance, and my family's credit card debt, the little money I had left barely covered simple meals and rent for a tiny apartment in the city. I never complained at work. To my colleagues, I was strong, independent, stable. No one knew that. Every night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like a caged bird. There were nights Kevin called me drunk after midnight, begging for money to cover his gambling losses. I'd yell, "Do you even know what I had to do to earn that money?" But before I could say more, I'd hear my mother on the other end. "Nora, he's your brother. Just help him one more time. Your family." I'd hang up, tears streaming down, torn between anger and despair. I lost count of how many times they said, "Just this once," only for it to never be the last. The burdens kept piling up endlessly. And I, the so-called freeloader, was the only one holding that house together. Looking back, my family was like a painting dressed in bright colors to hide the cracks underneath. My father wore the mask of a man who gave everything for his kids. My mother, the cloak of a long-suffering mother. Kevin, the title of the promising son. And I carried everything to keep that painting from falling apart in front of the world. I lived like that for years, blindly believing that if I just gave a little more, everything would change. But the truth was, the more I gave, the more I was used. And when I turned 33, I finally realized the sweet family I had clung to all this time was nothing more than an illusion. That day, I left the office later than usual. The late autumn wind in Chicago sliced through my coat as I clutched a small cake box I'd bought near work. It was simple white frosting and a few wobbly letters. "Happy birthday, Nora." I didn't expect much. I only hoped for a quiet family dinner, even though I knew my parents never did anything special for me. I told myself that just sitting down together would be enough. As I walked into the house, the soft yellow light from the living room spilled into the hallway. I was surprised to see a few unfamiliar faces, neighbors, and some old acquaintances. My mother, Martha, bustled around, pouring drinks, smiling with her mouth but avoiding my eyes. My father, Richard, sat proudly at the head of the table, holding a glass like a host showing off. Kevin lounged on a chair, loudly joking with friends. For a moment, I wondered had they really remembered my birthday and thrown a party. I placed the cake box on the dining table and forced a smile. I thought I'd bring something sweet for dinner. No one responded. A few guests glanced at me, then turned away. My mother gave a faint nod but didn't say a word. Dinner began. On the table were familiar dishes: stew, mashed potatoes, canned beans. People ate, laughed, while I sat quietly, trying to find one moment to feel like I belonged. The sound of cutlery clinking against plates mixed with laughter from Kevin's group. I cut a small bite, telling myself silence was a way to keep the peace. But that silence didn't last. My father suddenly slammed his fork on the table. The sharp noise made everyone freeze. He leaned back in his chair and stared straight at me. There was no affection in his eyes, only cold contempt. "Starting today, you need to move out," he said, his voice like steel. "We're not supporting a freeloader." The words dropped like a blade. The room sank into silence. I could hear my heart pounding inside my chest. A few guests looked stunned, but no one dared to speak. I looked to my mother, hoping she would say something to explain that my father had just been drunk, that it was all a misunderstanding. But she lowered her head, her hand trembling as it gripped the napkin. She said nothing, not a word in my defense. Kevin broke the silence with a dry laugh. "I told you, Mom, Dad. She has no reason to stay. All she does is work her whole life. Can't even manage a family of her own. Pathetic." Every word my younger brother uttered hit me like shards of broken glass. I kept my breathing steady, refusing to cry. I wanted to scream. Who's really the freeloader when I'm the one paying the electric bill, the water bill, Mom's medication, and even the tuition Kevin wasted and dropped out of? But I held it in. Standing there under the weight of everyone's stares, I knew that if I raised my voice, it would only give them more reason to humiliate me. A neighbor, Mrs. Ellen, cleared her throat as if she was about to say something, then stopped. She looked at me with sympathy, then quickly dropped her gaze to her plate. A heavy silence blanketed the room. I took a deep breath, lifted my head, and looked straight at my father. "All right, I understand." Just 3 simple words. No tears, no shouting. I gave a small, firm nod. In his eyes, it was the gesture of someone admitting defeat. But in my heart, it was the beginning of a very different decision. My father smirked and lifted his glass, finishing it like a man who'd just claimed victory. My mother remained silent, her shoulders sagging, eyes avoiding mine. Kevin laughed even louder, like watching me crumble was his only joy. I sat a little longer. No one bothered to touch the cake I had brought. The candle I had prepared never even got lit. My birthday dinner turned into a trial where the one being judged was me, the daughter who had sacrificed her youth to hold this family together. As I stood up, I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Some whispered quietly, others avoided looking directly at me. I walked away from the table, my heart heavy, but my face calm. No tears fell. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. As I passed by my mother, I paused briefly, hoping she'd say something, anything, even just a soft word. But she only gripped the napkin tighter, her lips pressed together so hard they turned pale. I understood then, she would never speak up. I kept walking and passed Kevin. He leaned in just enough for me to hear him whisper, "Finally decided to disappear, huh?" His mocking tone sent a chill down my spine, but I didn't respond. I kept my eyes fixed on the door, where the porch light spilled in like a path out of that suffocating room. I grabbed my coat, opened the door, and stepped out. No one called after me. The door slammed shut behind me with a sharp crack, sealing off the illusion of a family I had clung to for so many years. Outside, the cold wind slapped my face, making me shiver. I wrapped my arms around myself and looked up at the dark sky, no stars in sight. The box of cake still sat on the table inside, untouched. My 33rd birthday ended in silence and shame, but deep down, something else was beginning to burn. Not despair, a quiet fire. A strength they never knew I had. And I realized this night was only the beginning. I walked into the cold night. The wind whistled through the dry trees, threatening to swallow all sound. My feet felt heavy, but my mind was flooded with memories, clear and sharp, cutting into my heart. That moment when my father called me a freeloader in front of everyone, that wasn't just a dinner outburst. It was the result of years of being used. I remembered the day he dropped the overdue credit card statement on the kitchen table. I had just started working as a financial manager in Chicago, barely making ends meet. He sat across from me, eyes bloodshot from drinking, his voice half pleading, half commanding. "Nora, you're smart. You know how to manage things." I slipped up. "But if you cover this for me, I promise I'll to get back on track." I believed him. I sold the only car I had my daily ride. I commuted by train for 2 years, crammed among strangers, so he could stay home without facing consequences. Then my mother. When she fell ill, The doctor prescribed a long list of medications, most not covered by insurance. I had been saving for my first ever beach trip. I dreamed of sitting on warm sand, listening to waves, breathing in freedom. But when she handed me that prescription with tear-filled eyes, I quietly pulled out my card and canceled the entire vacation. I still remember her holding my hand, choking up. "I'll never forget what you've done." But weeks later, when she spoke to our relatives, she said, "Thank goodness Kevin stepped in to take care of the medical bills. I don't know what we would have done." I sat quietly in the corner, listening to those words twist like knives in my chest. There was a time when the company offered me a promotion on the condition I relocate to another city. It was a dream opportunity, a turning point in my career, but I turned it down. My mother called me crying. "I'm weak and your father can't do much. If you leave, I'll have no one." I folded the offer letter and tucked it away in a drawer. That chance never came again. Those sacrifices I used to think they were my choice, a daughter's duty, that I was doing the right thing. But the truth became clearer with time. I had turned into nothing more than a bottomless wallet. And the cruelest blow came the day I discovered they had taken out loans in my name without my knowledge. That day I received a letter from the bank. I opened it to find a delinquency notice. I was confused. I never took out a loan that big. I called the bank immediately, and their response stunned me. "The account is under the name Nora Richardson. Signature on file is valid. The loan was opened 6 months ago." I collapsed onto the floor. I had never signed anything. Someone had forged my signature. That evening, I laid the letter in front of my parents. I asked directly, "What is this loan?" My father cleared his throat, trying to stay calm. "You're good with money. You can handle it. I only used your name. It was for home repairs for this family." I looked to my mother, hoping she'd deny it, but she just sighed and looked away. "Your father did it for the house," she said softly. "Kevin didn't even try to hide it." He smirked. "What's the big deal? You make good money. Without you, this house would have fallen apart a long time ago." I felt the floor beneath me crack. They hadn't just taken my money or effort. They had turned me into a legal debtor, tied me down with financial chains, so that if I ever dared fight back, I'd be the one punished. I remember not sleeping at all that night. I sat by the window, staring at the distant streetlights, feeling nothing but emptiness. All those years of sacrifice, not love, not gratitude, but betrayal. I asked myself, why did I keep believing they would change? The next day, I went to the bank to review the records. The employee handed me a copy of the loan agreement. The signature said my name, but the handwriting was sloppy and rushed, nothing like my actual signature used in all my documents. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. They had forged my name. But when I asked the bank for help, they said, "The documents have cleared all verifications. There's nothing we can do." That night, I came home to find my father casually watching TV. He looked up at me, as if nothing serious had happened. "Don't blow this out of proportion, sweetheart. The more you fight, the more people will think you're ungrateful. It's just money, you've got a job, don't you?" My mother nodded, gently adding, "That's right, Nora. Don't stress yourself. You're the strongest one in this house. You can handle it." That phrase, "you can handle," it had become a curse repeated for years. I had handled everything, from small bills to large debts, from daily expenses to the future I was supposed to have. I had become a pillar that was never allowed to crack, while they lived off my sacrifice. I thought of the canceled vacation, the sold car, the career I let slip away. All of it came flooding back. Things I lost, never to be regained. And then I looked at myself, a 33-year-old woman who had never lived for herself, never bought something she truly wanted, never tasted freedom. I finally understood. The family I protected wasn't a home, it was a trap. They built a facade of sacrifice for their child to fool everyone, while the truth was they took everything from me, even my dignity. And the cruelest part? I let them. For years. Just because I craved the love of a family. Sitting there remembering all of it, I felt my heart freeze over. My sacrifices were like candles that had burned out without ever being lit. And when my father declared I was a parasite at that birthday party, I realized that in their eyes, nothing I had done had ever mattered. But that very moment also planted another truth inside me. If they could so shamelessly make me the legal scapegoat for their debts, then I could learn to stand up and reclaim what was mine. Because I had nothing left to lose except the chains that had dragged me down my entire life. That night, I sat alone in a small room, the warm yellow glow of the lamp spilling across the desk, casting shadows on the piles of documents stacked like scars from the past. The house was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock against the air. I opened the laptop I had brought home from work, my hand trembling from exhaustion, but inside me, there was no hesitation left. The screen lit up as I took a deep breath and started the familiar steps I used to take to keep my whole family afloat. But every click held a completely different meaning. First, the electric bill. I'd been listed as the account holder for years, ever since my parents once forgot to pay and we lost power for 2 days in the dead of winter. I typed in the password, logged in, and saw the outstanding balance staring back at me. All those years I had paid for them, keeping the lights on. Now, I hovered over the settings and canceled auto payment. A prompt appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel? I paused for a second, then clicked confirm. When cancellation successful flashed on the screen, it felt like I had just cut a rope that had bound me for far too long. Next was the water bill, also in my name. I remembered clearly the time my father shouted, "If you care about this family, then act like it. Don't let the water bill go unpaid." He didn't mention that I had been covering it entirely since the day he lost his job. I logged in again, canceled autopay, and saved the receipt. Then came the internet, what Kevin used endlessly for gaming and online betting. I stared at the account linked to my card, the monthly charges quietly siphoned from my balance. I clicked cancel, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled. All the silence I had swallowed over the years was slowly unraveling. When I opened the car insurance portal, my heart sank a little. The contract listed both my mother's old sedan and my father's pickup truck. I had bundled them into my own policy to help them save a few $100s a month. I remembered the look in my mother's eyes when she said, "You're good with money. Help us a little." I had thought that was love. But really, it was a trap. Slowly, I moved the cursor and removed each vehicle from the plan. The screen showed a blank section, and for the first time in years, I saw only my name on the policy. I took a screenshot and saved all the paperwork as undeniable proof. I didn't stop there. I opened the bank account that held what we used to call the emergency fund, something I had built over the years thinking it would help in times of crisis. I had poured money into it for safety, only to find my parents and Kevin quietly withdrawing, bit by bit, until I couldn't even remember when that account had truly belonged to me. I clicked freeze account. A message popped up. No withdrawals or transfers until reactivated by the account holder. I stared at that sentence for a long while. Imprinting it in my memory, I had just saved myself from a bottomless pit. Once everything was done, I sat quietly in the dark, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was the beat of liberation. I opened each folder, saving every receipt, every bill, every statement. I created one large file and named it Evidence. Inside, I organized everything by category: electricity, water, internet, insurance, banking. Each document was a reminder that I had sacrificed, even if no one acknowledged it. And now, they would become my shield, if the day ever came that they dared to accuse me. When the clock struck midnight, I finally closed the laptop. The room sank into stillness, but within me surged a storm. I leaned back in the chair, stared up at the ceiling. In my mind echoed my father calling me a leech, Kevin's mocking laugh. Together, they fueled a resolve that would not be shaken. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street lay in darkness, the wind carrying an early winter chill. The neighboring houses were still lit, families gathering for the night. But in my parents' home, I imagined nothing but a vast emptiness. I realized my family had never truly been a source of support. They were a drain, a vacuum that had hollowed me out. That night, I didn't cry. My tears had dried up long ago. I only felt light, as if I'd finally set down a 1,000-pound burden. I knew this wasn't cruel revenge. It was balance. I was giving them exactly what they had chosen, a life. Without me and without my sacrifices. I returned to the desk, opened the drawer, and took out a small notebook. Inside, I began writing line by line. How many years I had paid, how much money, what opportunities I had given up. I wrote it all down, every dollar, every date. The blank pages slowly filled with my truth, as if I was rewriting my life, one fact at a time. The tapping of my pen against the paper mixed with the wind outside, forming a rhythm that kept me sharp. I saw that I was no longer the timid girl who once bowed her head and bore it all. I was becoming a woman who knew how to protect herself, who knew how to say, enough. That night stretched longer than any before. But when I finally closed the notebook and placed it on the table, I felt a chapter had ended. Inside me, a quiet fire began to glow. And I knew, from this moment on, I would never again let them dictate my fate. The next morning, just as the first sunlight crept through the curtains, I heard my SAC did work, phone vibrating continuously on the table. A stream of missed calls lit up the screen. Mom, Dad, even some unknown numbers. I didn't need to guess what was happening. I sat still for a few minutes, hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, watching the steam curl in my quiet apartment. Across the street, a neighbor was opening their door to greet the day. But my parents' house was likely now swallowed in literal darkness. I pictured my father flipping the light switch like he always did, only to find nothing turning on. My mother fumbling with the electric stove, baffled by its silence. Kevin, no doubt yelling because he couldn't get online to place a bet. Everything they had taken for granted had vanished overnight. The phone rang again. I let it ring until it stopped. Then came a voicemail. I pressed play. My mother's voice, shaky. Nora, there must be some kind of mistake, right, sweetheart? We lost power, water's gone. Our bank cards are getting declined. Can you call someone to check for us? Must be a system glitch, right, honey? She couldn't even say it out loud. A few minutes later, Dad's voice came through, rough and furious. What the hell are you doing? Don't think moving out means you can run away. You owe us, you hear me? You only survived because we raised you. Get back here and fix everything before I come find you. I bit my lip, but there was no fear left in me. Their voices were just passing winds now, unable to bind me anymore. By noon, another message came from an old coworker. Nora, have you seen Kevin's Facebook post? I opened the app, and there it was. Kevin had written, some daughters think they're so successful, but they're nothing but ungrateful brats. We raised her, gave her everything, and now she turns her back, cuts off support, and leaves our elderly parents to suffer. Please pray for my mom and dad. They don't deserve this. The post had already been shared dozens of times, comments flooding in. Some expressed pity for my parents, poor Richard and Martha. Others were angry on their behalf. What kind of daughter does that? Every line twisted the truth beyond recognition. The one who had given everything was now painted as the villain, while the users became victims. My phone rang again. It was our old neighbor, Mrs. Ellen. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was soft. Nora, don't be upset. I saw Kevin's post. But sweetheart, I've lived next to your family for years. I know the truth. I saw you coming home late from work, fixing leaks on the roof by yourself. I saw you hauling groceries in the snow while your parents sat comfortably inside. Don't let people's words shake you. I choked up, gripping the phone. At least someone remembered the truth. But not everyone was so fair. Later that afternoon, I got a message from my aunt in another state. Nora, what's going on? How could you let your parents live like this? They're old. Now, and you're successful. How could you be so cruel? Reading it, exhaustion swept over me. All these years, they never saw the truth. My parents had crafted an image of two selfless elders, while I was painted as the selfish daughter. They never once asked how I was doing, only looked at the picture my parents had painted. Night had fallen when I reopened my laptop and began reading through all the accusations on social media. Kevin kept posting more photos of our father sitting alone in a pitch-black living room, our mother holding a candle, with a caption that read, "Our own daughter abandoned us." People rushed to show sympathy, shared the post, and hurled insults at me. I kept reading, no longer feeling anger, just an icy numbness. I knew then they wouldn't stop. I got up and paced the small room, my chest burning. I remembered the file I had prepared the night before: every bill, every bank statement, every confirmation email. All the evidence lay there, perfectly organized. I grabbed the folder and flipped through each page under the soft desk lamp. The numbers stared back at me like silent witnesses. The phone rang again. This time it was a video call from Kevin. I declined it, but his text popped up immediately. "You think you're clever? All you're doing is making yourself look like a heartless freak. You'll come crawling back, 'cause we both know you've got no one else but family." I looked at the screen and smiled slightly. He had no idea I wasn't the same person anymore. I leaned back in the chair and took a long, deep breath. In my mind, I could picture my parents scrambling around the house, furiously calling customer service, blaming the bank. I imagined Kevin typing furiously, spitting lies online, all three of them spinning in the darkness, while I sat here in stillness, no longer their puppet. I didn't answer any messages or return any calls. I just sat there, the soft blue glow from the screen, reflecting on my face. Inside me, something was growing: not satisfaction, not even hatred, just the steady calm of someone who had finally reclaimed a little piece of justice. When the clock struck midnight, I shut the laptop, pulled open the curtain, and looked out into the street. The whole neighborhood was lit up except for my parents' house, cloaked in cold darkness. I stood there, watching for a long time, letting that moment sink into memory. Not out of revenge, but to remind myself that blind sacrifice ends here. That the lights in their house had to go out, for the ones in me to finally switch on. It took nearly a full day to prepare everything. Every bill was re-scanned with care. Each bank statement was marked in red, clearly showing the money deducted from my account to pay for utilities, car insurance, internet, and healthcare. I even dug up an old photo from my phone, me on the roof, covered in dirt, fixing leaks in the pouring December rain. I also found an email from the bank confirming that the joint account had been frozen, stating I was the sole owner. No angry rants, no emotional tirades. I wrote just one single post, simple, clear, and calm. My name is Nora. For years, I have been the person listed on every household bill: electricity, water, internet, car insurance, medications, even loans I never signed for. I've spent my entire paycheck to keep a roof over heads that never acknowledged my sacrifice. I was called a freeloader on my own birthday. I was thrown out of a house I carried both financially and emotionally. Attached below are the facts. I'm not sharing this for pity. I'm sharing it because the truth deserves to be told. I uploaded all the documents I'd compiled, bills in my name, photos of me fixing the roof in the rain, loan agreements under my name but with forged signatures, screenshots of texts from my mother begging me to cover her medical expenses, an email from my father pleading for money to repair Kevin's car. Then I hit post. Within less than 2 hours, the post had been shared over 100 times. Comments poured in. First, from a few old college friends. I always knew Nora was the responsible one. I just didn't realize it was this bad. Then coworkers chimed in. Every time we invited her to lunch, she'd say she needed to send money home. Now I understand. A neighbor unexpectedly reshared my post with this caption. I've lived next to them for 10 years. I've seen Nora out there fixing the roof, washing the car, cleaning the drains. Meanwhile, her dad sat on the porch smoking, drinking beer, yelling into his phone. This truth should have come out long ago. The story spread like wildfire. I got a message from a high school friend I hadn't heard from in years. Nora, I remember Kevin bragging about how you paid his tuition even after he got expelled. Reading your story just breaks my heart. By afternoon, a coworker sent me a Screenshot from the neighborhood group chat. A woman named Mrs. Haley had written, "I once saw that girl carrying in heavy groceries during a snowstorm. Her mother just stood at the door watching. Something about it never sat right with me." There was even a video I hadn't known existed me, standing on the roof one January afternoon, hammer in hand, my thin raincoat clinging to my body. Someone had filmed it from the house next door. It had now been reposted with a caption that read, "This is the freeloader they were talking about?" The tone of the comments began to shift. "Can't believe the one who got kicked out was the only one holding the house together. They lived off her for years, and now that she finally says no, they play the victims? What kind of parents forge their daughter's signature to get a loan?" I didn't reply to any of the comments. I just sat in front of the screen, a strange calm spreading through my chest. Not because of the support, but because, for once, I didn't have to stay silent. That night, I received a message from my old high school teacher, the one I had always looked up to. "Nora, I taught you in 11th grade. You were always quiet, serious about your work. I thought you came from a peaceful home. After reading your story, I just want to say I believe you. And I'm proud of you for standing up." I cried, but not out of sadness, out of relief. I didn't sleep a wink. Every few minutes, someone new would share my post. Another comment. Another voice echoing what I had never dared to say. The next morning, I opened my phone to find dozens of missed calls from my mother, my father, and Kevin. The messages kept coming. "How could you humiliate your own family like this? You just destroyed our reputation. Who's going to care about you once they see how you aired all this out?" But I didn't feel guilty. There was no trembling in my hands. I was done playing the wrong part in their little script, and I wasn't going back. That afternoon, I received a message from someone I didn't even know. He simply wrote, "Thank you for speaking up for all of us still trapped in families like that." I sat by the window, watching the light rain drizzle beneath a pale gray sky, but I didn't feel cold. I had chosen truth, and truth finally had a voice. If they wanted to paint me as the betrayer, I would let them stare at their own reflection, but there would be no silence left to hide behind. No more false virtue shielding them once the light had pierced every crack. The first message arrived at 7 in the morning, just as I was pouring a cup of coffee. The screen lit up with a short message from a college friend. "Nora, are you okay? Did they really sue you?" I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I set the cup down, opening the next message, and then the next. They were all asking the same question, and when I checked my email inbox, what I feared most appeared before me. An official message from the county court with an attachment, notice of summons, civil case. I opened the file. Each word slashed across my mind like a blade. Plaintiffs, Richard and Martha Richardson. Defendant, Nora Richardson. Allegations, elder financial abuse and misappropriation of family property. I sat in silence for a long time. What I felt wasn't anger, it was deep disorientation. Even though I'd tried to prepare myself mentally, I never imagined they'd go this far. I had never touched anything that didn't belong to me. Every bill was in my name. Every expense came out of my pocket. But then I flipped to the final page, the section listing the charges. One line made my palms turn ice cold. The defendant cut off all utilities, failed to provide food, and denied medical support, resulting in the plaintiff's elderly individuals being left starving and in life-threatening conditions. They were saying I starved them. I read that line 3 times, trying to understand how they could say such a thing. After all those years, I bought every pill, every bag of rice, every insurance policy. My phone vibrated again. A strange number. I didn't pick up. Then came the text. "You're heartless. How could you abandon your own elderly parents like that?" Then another. "You lived a cushy life on the backs of the people who gave you life. And now that you've made a name for yourself, you turn your back on them? You don't deserve to be called a daughter." I clenched the phone in my hand. My vision blurred, but I refused to let the tears fall. I opened my laptop and logged onto Facebook. The first thing that appeared was Kevin's newest post, accompanied by a photo of my parents sitting on the couch in the dark, with 2 unopened cups of instant noodles on the table. The caption was long and theatrical. After losing power and water, this is all they have: dry noodles. This is dinner for my father, a man who raised an ungrateful daughter for over 30 years. The comments stacked up: strangers condemning me, cursing me, damning me. They didn't care what the truth was. All they needed was a tragic tale to unleash their collective outrage. I couldn't eat anything all day. I scrolled through every message, every email, every reaction like I was being pulled into a whirlpool with no end. My mind drifted in and out of a storm of hateful, unfamiliar voices. By evening, I found myself sitting motionless on the floor, holding the file of evidence I had so carefully prepared. But at that moment, it felt weightless. No matter how many bills, no matter how many photos, people had already chosen to believe my parents' fake tears. I broke down. I couldn't hold it in any longer. Not because I was insulted, but because of the brutal unfairness. I had lived my life in silence, enduring, holding on to hope that family would redeem all misunderstanding. But no, the very people I once protected had turned me into a monster in the eyes of the world. That night, I received a call from a public interest attorney I had once worked with on a community project. His name was Eric. "I've read it," he said, his voice calm but steady. "They're trying to use the media to destroy you before the case even reaches court." I was silent for a long time. Finally, I asked, "If they can lie like this and still be believed, what's left of justice?" Eric didn't hesitate. "You have the truth. You have evidence. And you have rights. Don't let them take that away from you too." After the call, I sat staring out the window. Night had fully settled in. In my mind, I saw the image of my father when I was little, the man who once carried me across flooded streets, who hugged me tightly when I was afraid of thunder. I had loved him unconditionally, like every child loves their father, but that man no longer existed. Now, he was the one whose name appeared at the top of a lawsuit accusing his own daughter, the one who had carried the weight of the family for years. I stood up, wiped my face, then returned to the desk, turned on the lamp, and reopened the entire file. I reorganized the documents, timestamped everything. I opened my email and drafted a message to my new attorney, attaching all the evidence: utility receipts, bank statements, photos of the roof repairs, even images of care packages I had mailed from Chicago during the pandemic. I typed slowly, but with certainty. "I'm being sued for refusing to continue being exploited. This is the full set of records I've kept through all the years no one ever asked how I was surviving." When I hit send, I didn't feel relief. But I knew one thing for sure: I wouldn't back down. I closed the laptop, poured myself a glass of water, then sat in the chair by the window, watching as the streetlights flickered on. The glow from the other houses still looked warm and familiar. But inside me, the storm had just begun, and I wouldn't run from it. I had lived a life buried beneath lies, and now I would peel back every layer through truth, through the law, and through the sound of my own voice. I never expected that in the worst storm of my life, the clearest truth would emerge stronger than any evidence I had ever prepared. That morning, I sat in the attorney's office, the air so cold I had to pull my coat tighter. Eric carefully reviewed each document I'd emailed him the night before. He sat in silence for a while, then looked at me. "There's something I need to ask you," he said gently but firmly. "Did you ever sign for a personal credit loan worth $65,000? I looked up, stunned. "No, I've never taken out anything close to that. The only loan I've ever had was the mortgage for my small apartment, and I paid that off last year." Eric handed me a copy of the loan contract. My name, Nora Richardson, was clearly printed beneath the signature, but the handwriting wasn't mine. I don't write with a rightward slant, and I never underline my name. "This loan was opened about 10 months ago," Eric said. "Unfortunately, the bank didn't catch the forgery because the identity documents were submitted in person at a local branch. But I've called them. They're pulling the camera footage and comparing the signature. If what you're saying is true, this isn't just a misunderstanding. This is identity theft and financial fraud." I clenched my fists. Suddenly, all the scattered pieces in my mind started fitting together. I remembered that night nearly a year ago, when my mother called to say the washing machine was broken and their savings were gone, asking to borrow $10,000. I had declined because I had just paid for her dental treatments. She didn't speak to me for a month afterward. Maybe during that time, my parents used my name to borrow. Money? I asked, my lips dry. Eric nodded. We'll need legal verification, but essentially, yes. If you didn't know, didn't sign, didn't agree, then it's forged. And if there's proof they did this intentionally, we can countersue. I sat there, feeling like I was floating outside my own body. This wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just online slander. They had used my name to build a house of debt I'd never even set foot in. Eric carefully placed the contract back in the file. He looked at me for a long moment, as if searching for the right words to say something even he found hard to believe. Nora, he said slowly, a lot of people grow up in toxic families. But not everyone has the courage to break the cycle. You did the right thing. And now, you need to keep going. I took a long breath, as if drawing every ounce of air back into my lungs. That afternoon, I got a call from my cousin Emily, my aunt's daughter, 3 years younger than me. We'd been close growing up, but life had taken us in different directions. Emily studied in the next city and worked as a freelance graphic designer. We hadn't spoken much in years. Her voice sounded hesitant. Nora, I've seen everything that's been going on. I know you don't want anyone dragged into this, but there's something I think you need to know. I sat down on the bed, listening. About 6 months ago, I went to Kevin's friend's wedding. He was drunk, really drunk, and he kept throwing his arm around me, rambling on. I tried to laugh it off, but then he said, "You were such an easy target, that you did everything by the book, so it was easy to take advantage of you." I asked. "Take advantage how?" He laughed and said, "My sister? I let her pay off all the debts she thought she was being noble." I didn't say anything. All I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat slowing, then pounding in my chest. I didn't believe it at first. Emily said quietly, "I thought maybe he was just drunk and talking nonsense. But when I saw the posts he made online, I knew you weren't the one who was wrong." Her voice dropped lower. "If you need a witness, I'll do it. I can't stay silent anymore." My throat tightened. After all those days of being surrounded by fake news, false accusations, and the silence of people I once called family, someone was finally willing to speak the truth. "Thank you," I whispered, as if lifting a weight off my chest. That night, I sat alone in my room, placing 2 folders side by side. One held years of evidence showing how I had financially supported my family. The other contained the forged loan contract, along with the recording of Kevin bragging about it. I looked at the papers, not just numbers and cold documents anymore. They were survival. They were my voice. Proof that I wouldn't drown beneath their lies anymore. I opened my laptop and drafted a new email sent directly to the plaintiff's attorney, with an official statement from my lawyer attached. The last sentence I typed read, "If you want to come at me through the law, then be prepared to face the whole truth." As I hit send, I sat still, letting the glow of the screen reflect on my face. I was no longer the woman who once knelt at a birthday dinner, begging for pity. I was standing in the middle of the storm now, but I brought the wind with me. The courtroom that day was chillingly quiet, like even the air was holding its breath, waiting for the verdict in what looked like a family dispute but was, in truth, a full unmasking of blood ties. I sat upright, gripping the case files Eric and I had prepared over 2 sleepless weeks. The judge was an older woman, sharp-eyed and serious but fair. She flipped through each page submitted by our side, then looked at me, brows furrowed. "Miss Nora, please clearly present the evidence you're submitting, particularly regarding the signatures and financial transactions in your countersuit." I stood up. My voice didn't shake. It wasn't loud or rushed, but every word reached every ear in that room. "Your Honor, I submit a complete record of financial expenditures over the past 8 years, all of which were paid solely by me. These are my bank statements, matching the utility bills, tuition fees for my brother, Kevin Richardson, medical expenses for my mother, Martha Richardson, and home maintenance invoices. In every case, I was the one who paid. There was never any reimbursement from the plaintiffs. I placed the second folder on the table. This is a credit loan contract from East Shore Bank, totaling $65,000. It was opened 10 months ago, and the signature listed is in my name. However, I've included a handwriting analysis by a court-approved expert confirming the signature does not match my legal signature. The room stirred. I kept my tone steady. Additionally, I submit an audio recording of a witness, Miss Emily Carter, testifying that Kevin Richardson had repeatedly bragged about tricking me into taking on his debts and even treated it like a joke. The judge requested the recording be played. Kevin's voice echoed through the speaker, muffled slightly by party music, but clear enough that no one could deny it. My sister? She's so easy to fool. I just have to act pitiful and she pulls out her wallet. Dumber than the rest of him. The room thickened with tension. I could feel the audience's gaze turning toward my parents and brother. Richard's face turned bright red, like he might explode. Martha kept her head down, clutching her dress. And Kevin, he wasn't smirking like he did on Facebook. He looked pale, his mouth slightly open, trying to speak but nothing came out. The judge set the file down, her voice firm. Based on the submitted evidence and the testimony of an independent witness, this court dismisses the plaintiff's case, due to lack of legal basis and signs of fraudulent intent. Furthermore, the court orders an investigation into potential financial fraud, forged signatures, and identity theft involving Mr. Richard and Mrs. Martha Richardson, as well as their son, Kevin Richardson. The room erupted in whispers. From the back benches, I saw reporters who had followed the case since Kevin's viral post start lifting their cameras. And then something happened that no one expected. Richard, my father, suddenly stood, slamming both hands on the table so hard the papers shook. "Enough," he shouted, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "What more do you people want? This girl was my damn ATM. Ever since she got a job, this family lived off her. She owes us. I raised her, so I have the right to use her money." I didn't turn around. I just closed my eyes. His words cut through me like the final blade, tearing apart the illusion I had clung to of something called family. The judge banged her gavel 3 times. "Order? Mr. Richardson, your statement will be entered into the record. The prosecution will follow up on potential criminal charges." My mother began to cry. Not out of grief for me, but because everything they had built their image as devoted parents, the facade of a perfect family, had just been shattered by her husband's outburst. The trial ended. I walked out into the hallway, washed in the cold afternoon light of Chicago. Eric walked beside me, silent, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "Not because you won, but because you didn't become a twisted version of them." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat was tight, not with tears but with relief. Like a sealed room had finally opened a window. I took out my phone. I didn't post anything online. I simply sent Emily a text. "Thank you. Not everyone has the courage to stand for the truth. But you did." Outside the courthouse, cameras rolled, and shutters clicked, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I was no longer the silent shadow behind every bill, every sacrifice, every unspoken cry for peace. My new apartment was just over 400 square feet, on the 3rd floor of an aging building in North Chicago. The window faced the street, where each morning sunlight filtered through the old oak trees and warmed the beige rug I had picked out myself when I moved in. No one helped me unpack. No one waited with a cup of tea or asked, "You're home?" But I had never felt so free. I started with small things. Hung a landscape painting of the American West I'd loved for years but never dared to buy. Installed warm yellow lights by the bed. Placed a jar of dried lavender by the windowsill. Every detail in this room was mine, not chosen to please anyone, not for someone else to crash in, not to keep the peace. For the first time in 33 years, I had a real home. I still went to work at the finance firm, but instead of rushing home to cook, do laundry, and count out pills, I took a stroll through the nearby park. I learned to cook not because someone demanded dinner, but because I wanted to try making the famous cheesy lasagna I once saw in a magazine. Some evenings, I'd pour myself a glass of red wine, play soft jazz, and read until late. Simple things, yet they had been a luxury I couldn't afford for so many years. One quiet weekend afternoon, I was watering the herb pots on my balcony when the doorbell rang. I opened the door. It was Mrs. Angela, my downstairs neighbor, a widow in her 60s who usually complained about footsteps at night. "Hello, dear," she said, her voice gentler than usual. "I read the paper, everything that happened. I'm truly sorry for misjudging you. I used to think you were cold, arrogant, but now I see you were just carrying too much on your shoulders." I smiled and gently invited her in. We sat together over tea, sharing stories we had never told anyone. It turned out Mrs. Angela had once been taken to court by her own son over a property dispute. We didn't need to say much. Just being there, listening to each other, that was enough to ease the weight inside. In the days that followed, I began receiving letters, messages, even flowers left at my door from people I never expected. A coworker from my department who used to keep her distance texted, "I regret believing what Kevin posted. You're the strongest woman I've ever met." A group of college friends I had drifted apart from while caring for my family sent a message. "We always knew Nora was someone who lived for others. Now it's time to live for yourself." And on a windless Sunday afternoon, while passing by my favorite bakery, I suddenly stopped. Inside were rows of small, colorful cakes, and on a wooden shelf stood a tiny round vanilla cake with a handwritten message. "You deserve joy." I stepped in, picked that cake, and asked the clerk to add a small wax candle. It wasn't anyone's birthday. No one was waiting to sing, but I knew I was marking the beginning of a new chapter in my life. That night, I turned off all the lights. Only the soft glow of the candle remained. The cake sat quietly on a little wooden table by the window. I lit the candle and watched its small flame flicker, as if waving hello to an old friend who had been gone for far too long. I whispered, not loud, not trying to sound brave. Just a breath from the heart, like an exhale after walking through a long storm. Family isn't about blood. Family is where there's love and respect. The candle burned steadily, its light reflecting in my eyes. I no longer feared being called a traitor. I was no longer haunted by the words, "You should be grateful your parents raised you." Because now, I understood gratitude doesn't mean tolerating abuse. Sacrifice should not be an invisible shackle that binds someone for life. I was no longer the quiet shadow behind a toxic family. I was Nora, a woman who knew her worth, who understood her boundaries, and who learned how to say no, even to those once called kin. My story doesn't end with a court ruling. It ends with a beginning, a new life where I no longer need to prove anything to anyone. All that matters now is waking up each morning, looking at myself in the mirror, and being able to smile. That's enough. If you've listened this far, maybe somewhere in my story, you saw a glimpse of yourself, even just a small part. Maybe you've kept quiet just to keep the peace. Maybe you've lived to please others so much that you forgot your own name. Maybe you've asked yourself, am I wrong for simply wanting to be loved the right way? I don't have the answers for you. But I believe if you've ever loved someone with all your heart, then you deserve something more than endless demands. And if one day you have to walk away from a place once called family to save yourself, that doesn't make you ungrateful. It means you're growing up. What do you think about my story? About the way I chose to close one chapter and begin another? I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings. Leave a comment below, because who knows, your words might help someone else still searching for a way out of their own storm. And if you're drawn to real stories about family, pain, and healing, don't forget to follow this channel. In the weeks ahead, I'll be sharing more snapshots, journeys of people who may seem ordinary, but are quietly reclaiming their worth. Thank you for walking with me to the very end. We'll meet again in the next story.